A dangerous storm is about to strike, and this one is going to bring life-threatening flooding, damaging winds, and a pretty nasty round of severe weather to a huge chunk of the country. Today, a high risk of excessive rainfall has been issued across parts of the lower Mississippi Valley, with a nearly stationary front sitting right on top of ground that is already saturated from the last 2 weeks of rain. This could easily lead to widespread totals of over a foot of rain, and in some spots, we could be looking at 15 to 18 inches before this thing finally pulls away. And as we head toward the weekend, we've got a completely different threat lining up, with a strong cold front diving out of the northern plains and racing toward the Ohio Valley and eventually the East Coast, bringing the risk of damaging winds, large hail, and even a few tornadoes. This pattern has been so relentless lately that, honestly, it feels like it's trying to age me 10 years in a week. So let's get right into it, because there is a ton to cover in today's forecast. Let's start with the flooding threat, because this is the headline story today. The Weather Prediction Center has placed a high risk of excessive rainfall over parts of northeast Louisiana, southeast Arkansas, and western Mississippi. And guys, this is the top tier risk category, meaning we could see catastrophic and life-threatening flash flooding develop through tonight and into tomorrow morning. Areas like Monroe, Tallulah, and Vicksburg are sitting right in the bullseye, and some of these communities rain over the last 24 hours alone. On top of that, we're expecting another 6 to 10 inches to fall today, with isolated pockets seeing considerably more. There's also a moderate risk in place, stretching from Jackson back through Alexandria and up into Greenville, so if you live in any of these areas, today is not a day to take lightly. Storms are going to keep firing along this stalled boundary, training over the same communities again and again, and that is exactly the ingredient that turns a heavy rain event into a genuine flash flood emergency. The reason we're seeing this happen is because of a very slow-moving frontal boundary that has essentially parked itself across the region, combined with a strong plume of Gulf moisture streaming north ahead of it. Precipitable water values are running well above normal for this time of year, and the Gulf moisture is basically acting like a fire, hose pointed directly at the same corridor of towns. Unless something shifts this boundary north or south, we're going to keep seeing storm after storm redevelop and dump heavy rain on ground that simply cannot absorb any more water. Rivers and smaller creeks in this region are already running high, so any additional rainfall is going to translate very quickly into flooding, even in spots that don't normally have issues. Let's talk timing for today. This morning, showers and storms were already firing up near Monroe and pushing into areas around Tallulah, and these are not going to be moving very fast at all. We're talking about rainfall rates of 1 to 2 inches per hour in the heavier cells, and in the most intense bands, we could see rates even higher than that for short bursts. By early afternoon, I expect this activity to expand southward toward Vicksburg and Natchez, and that's when the flash flood threat really ramps up for that corridor. By this evening, a secondary batch of storms should fire up closer to Jackson, and this could bring a renewed round of heavy rainfall, right as the ground is already fully saturated from the days earlier. Storms. Overnight, the boundary looks like it wants to sag just slightly south, which could finally give places like Monroe a bit of a break. But unfortunately, that just shifts the bullseye toward the Louisiana and Mississippi state line, where totals could get even more extreme. By tomorrow morning, we should start to see this system finally slide east, but scattered storms will likely continue through the afternoon before things gradually wind down by tomorrow night. Now let's look at what the models are saying about total rainfall over the next 48 hours. And I want to be clear that this does not include what has already fallen over the past day. The high-resolution models are painting some pretty scary numbers, with one run showing a pocket near the state line picking up close to 18 inches of rain. Now, I'll be honest, I'm not fully sold on that extreme number verifying exactly where it's showing, because these kinds of setups are incredibly sensitive to exactly where storms train, and a shift of even 5 or 10 miles can be the difference between a foot of rain and 2 inches. But even if we knock that number down a bit, we're still very likely looking at widespread totals of 8 to 12 inches in the hardest hit zones. Another model is a little more conservative, showing more of a widespread 5 to 8 inch swath, with a few embedded higher amounts closer to 10 inches. And then the blended guidance, which tends to average everything out and smooth over the extremes, is showing more like 3 to 6 inches. But I want to stress that blended numbers like this almost always underestimate the true maximum in a setup like this, because they're built to represent an average outcome rather than the worst case scenario. Given how saturated the ground already is and how slow this system is moving, I would not be surprised if we see at least a few reports of 10 to 15 inches before all is said and done. Now let's shift gears and talk about the bigger pattern change that's coming as we move into the weekend, because this is going to reshape our weather for the rest of the month. Right now we've got a strong ridge of high pressure anchored over the southern plains, and that's been helping to funnel all this deep moisture northward into the flooding zone we just talked about. But up toward the north, there's a very different story unfolding, with a sharp dip in the jet stream digging into the northern Rockies and preparing to slide east. This is going to send a strong cold front sweeping across the plains. By Friday, and as that front collides with all the warm, humid air sitting in place, we're likely going to see a significant severe weather setup develop from the central plains into the Midwest. Friday looks like it could bring the first real round of organized severe weather, with a corridor from Nebraska and Kansas stretching into Iowa and Missouri at risk for damaging winds, large hail, and a couple of tornadoes, especially during the afternoon and evening hours as instability peaks. As we move into Saturday, this activity should shift eastward into Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. And depending on exactly how this system evolves, we could see anything from scattered strong storms to a more organized line capable of widespread wind damage. There's still some uncertainty in exactly how far east and how intense this ends up being, but the ingredients are lining up for at least one, and possibly two, significant severe weather days this weekend. By Sunday, the front should be pushing into the Ohio Valley and toward the Appalachians. And this is when folks in Kentucky, West Virginia, and western Pennsylvania need to be paying close attention. Behind this front, we're going to see a noticeably cooler and drier air mass funnel in, which will be a welcome relief after what has been a pretty oppressive stretch of heat and humidity for a lot of the country. Monday and Tuesday should feature much more comfortable conditions from the Midwest into the Northeast, with morning lows dropping into the 50s and 60s in a lot of spots that have been stuck in the 70s overnight for weeks now. This is the kind of stretch where you can actually turn off the air conditioning and open the windows for a couple of days. Of course, this break in the heat is not going to last forever. As we look toward the middle of next week, there are already signs that the ridge will try to rebuild across the south and eventually push northward again, which means another round of hot and humid weather is likely by the end of next week, especially back across Texas and Oklahoma, where temperatures have been somewhat suppressed lately thanks to all the cloud cover and rain. Let's talk a bit more about the heat that's still in place before that cool down arrives, because today and tomorrow are going to be brutal in a few spots. Today, temperatures in the upper 90s are likely across much of the southern plains, with a few locations in Oklahoma and Texas flirting with the triple digits. The heat index, when you factor in the humidity, could push well past 105 in some communities, and that's a genuine heat safety concern if you're going to be outside for extended periods. Tomorrow looks even hotter in a few spots, with actual air temperatures near 100 possible in cities like Wichita Falls and Lawton, and heat index values approaching 110 in the worst case locations. This kind of heat is no joke, so if you don't have to be outside during the peak afternoon hours, I'd strongly recommend avoiding it. And please check on elderly neighbors or anyone without reliable air conditioning. Once we get into Friday and Saturday, that cold front sweeping through will start to knock temperatures down across the plains and Midwest, but ahead of the front, in places like Missouri and Illinois, we could actually see one final surge of heat and humidity before the cooler air arrives. So don't be surprised if Friday afternoon ends up being uncomfortably hot and muggy right before the storms roll in that evening. Looking further out into next week, the pattern still looks fairly active overall. There are hints in the extended models of at least one more storm system trying to organize somewhere across the central U.S. by the middle of next week, though confidence is still fairly low this far out, so we'll keep watching that and update you as the details become clearer. What I can say with more confidence is that we are not done with active weather this month. July has a habit of producing these kinds of stalled flooding setups combined with bursts of severe weather, and this year is shaping up to be no exception. So even though a lot of people start to shift their attention toward hurricane season and the peak of summer heat around this time of year, I wouldn't let your guard down just yet, because there is clearly still a lot going on. To wrap things up, here's the bottom line. If you live anywhere near the Louisiana, Arkansas, and Mississippi border region, today and tonight are extremely dangerous for flash flooding, and you should avoid driving through flooded roadways no matter how familiar they look, because it only takes a foot or two of moving water to sweep a vehicle away. If you're in the Central Plains or Midwest, keep an eye on Friday and Saturday for the potential of significant severe weather, including damaging winds and a few tornadoes. And if you're anywhere in the South right now, be smart about the heat over the next couple of days before that cold front finally brings some relief. As always, having a reliable source for weather updates is critical on a day like today, and that is exactly why so many of you have been downloading the free Weatherfront app, which gives you real-time radar, alerts, and forecasts right from your phone or desktop. It's available now on iOS and desktop, with an Android version on the way very soon, so stay tuned for that. I also want to mention that if you have travel plans near the flooding zone over the next couple of days, it would be wise to build in extra time or consider an alternate route, because road closures are likely and some could last well into the weekend depending on how quickly these rivers crest and recede. Emergency crews in several counties have already been placed on standby, and officials have been urging residents in low-lying areas to have an evacuation plan ready in case conditions worsen overnight. It's always better to be cautious here than to assume everything will be fine. Thank you all so much for watching today's forecast. If you're new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any updates on this fast-changing and honestly pretty exhausting weather pattern. I'll have another update for you either tomorrow or Friday at the latest, depending on how things evolve overnight, so stay safe. Out there, keep an eye on the sky, and we will see you in the next video.